is that if Bitcoin adds all these things and Ethereum just doesn't care about L1 execution anymore, what advantage do you really have over Bitcoin at that point that matters? And I don't think there's a lot that is really meaningful at that point if both of them are just saying our money and we're the settlement layer. Bitcoin is just better at those things. Like very objectively, it is just better at those things.
Okay, MJ, John Charbonneau, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having us.
How's it going?
So, John, I'm worried about you. I feel like it's been like 72 hours and I haven't seen you cause any chaos or have people question their life beliefs and investment thesis for a while. I just want to make sure you're doing all right.
Well, we'll see the update on that after I put the post out, which should be live by the time that this podcast comes out. So not sure what the reactions will be yet, but it'll be fun.
So maybe as soon as next week, we can have Twitter up in flame against you again.
The goal as usual.
Cool. So I think, John, you have a little bit of presence on Twitter. People may know you, but do you want to go ahead and give your background? And then MJ, same as you, maybe kind of what you guys are working on now and how you got into the space.
My background is pretty quick. So, I mean, I actually had a traditional background before coming into crypto. Traditional, I was, economics in college, I was doing the banking thing for a few years, pretty traditional for, I would say, a lot of people in crypto. And so I actually came in through the kind of, I would say, finance money centric side of it. I mean, the stuff that I got interested in was, actually just beginning of COVID, the Paul Tudor Jones types of the world, pitching, Bitcoin as this nonstop store of value, this digital gold thing, which just made a ton of sense to me as someone who is just, generally very interested in markets and stuff like that. So actually got very interested in it from that. That was kind of my segue into getting into crypto. About a year after that was when I actually joined full time, left my job in traditional finance. But when I started in crypto, I was doing infrastructure research before we started DBA together. And most of the stuff that I focused early on was actually more, I would say, on kind of like the Ethereum and modular and Solana, that kind of side. Just because while Bitcoin was the thing that, first got my attention, as I would say probably is still for, probably most people who get into crypto. When I got in, it wasn't the area in crypto that, was the center of, this is where a lot of people are building really interesting stuff at the time at that kind of like early COVID area. And I always had it in the back of my head of like, Bitcoin is this obvious thing. I'm one of those people who I think that we know most of the things that crypto is pretty good at, and Bitcoin is like this obvious thing. It just wasn't where most of the interesting development was at the time. And it's been really cool to see how much that has flipped over the past few years since I've come into crypto, particularly in this, year and a half or so, where there's a ton of like super exciting stuff going on in Bitcoin now. So, over that period, I've gravitated more towards spending a lot of time in the ecosystem, which has been a ton of fun.
Cool. And I'm actually from a prior generation from John. I came in when Bitcoin was it. Ethereum was still being figured out a bit, but Scaling Bitcoin was the original conference I went to where people were talking about Schnorr signatures, different types of BLS, the things that you would hear at more of a traditional kind of ETH-centric world now. And so I really got into Bitcoin. Started at Galaxy in 2017. Galaxy was primarily a crypto hedge fund, but was growing into what it is now, which is this multi-business entity. And my job was as an engineer to kind of help build out the firm's technology. This was at the time where you showed up to work and there was laptops in the corner, a set of chairs, like grab your laptop, get your chairs and just start working on whatever you can. That was kind of the crypto ethos at the time. Galaxy grew into this large organization. I moved over into the investing business, and mostly what we were doing was investing in what you think of the core infrastructure of crypto today. So custodians, exchanges, trading systems, EMS, PMS, OMS, whatever you need to do to manage crypto at the institutional scale that Galaxy was trying to execute themselves. Did that for a while and saw the different waves of Bitcoin. And a lot of what has gotten me excited about Alpin is that it smells and feels like the old Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is you walk into MIT, it's 4 degrees outside. The conference room heat's 110. There's a stale pizza, a Pepsi on the, at the front, and people are there because they want to be there. They could be doing anything. And the thing that they're super excited about at the moment is Bitcoin. And that energy in that room is unfalsifiable. There's no enterprise SaaS sponsor. There's this little white styrofoam cups that you chew on when you're nervous. Like you get that smell and taste. There's someone sleeping in the back. And to me, that authenticity, that organic interest is what has drawn most of the people that came to Bitcoin and stuck have come for that reason. And I do get really excited about the fact that we're getting that energy back. And this is whatever you want to call the kind of current Bitcoin political environment, technical environment, and general macro environment. It's a setup for interestingness and experimentation, which I think is a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is what is that possibility, probability? What can we do? What are we focusing on? But it's a little bit of a hallmark and a callback to what it was that got a lot of us into this industry.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so I definitely obviously want to talk about the Bitcoin stuff, this kind of like renaissance, this reemergence. Is it real? Is it fake? But I also want to give you guys the opportunity, like just to let people know. So how did you all decide to start working together and now running DBA? DBA is like a research entity. It's an investment fund. Like give us more of information about DBA, and then what is like, your North Star, like what is your guys' investing thesis? Doesn't necessarily have to be Bitcoin related, just to set the stage for everybody.
Yeah. So DBA started when I left Galaxy. I left Galaxy in mid-2022. It was at a weird point. This was pre-FTX, post Three Arrows, basically. And I think a lot of what got us into the ecosystem or industry was lost. People had come to do really interesting computer science, financial experimentation, and things moved so fast that we kind of lost sight of why we were there. And we started a thing called the Bear Market Homework Club. Bear Market is because we were in a ruthless bear market, and Homework Club being, why don't we get together as a group of like-minded people to actually learn fundamentally what is interesting here or not. And what was crazy about Bear Market Homework Club was normally when you reach out to people, you reach out to 10 people and 2 people are like, I'm in New York, I could come. 8 out of 10 people were there. And one of the people I reached out to was John. At the time, John was the first person I saw actually do the math on Ethereum rollups. I think I haven't looked back, but one of my first Twitter DMs to him was asking about how are you predicting the gross transaction cost of a OP stack rollup transaction? And nobody had done that, like simple back of napkin math. And John was like, oh, you're going to love the next thing I post. And this is at the time when John was working on his Hitchhiker's Guide to Ethereum, I believe. John, correct me if that was time-wise wrong, but we really came together around this idea of there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening. In the industry, you can rarely get in touch with the person who's building it. We reach out and the founder of Risk Zero is like, yeah, I'll be there next week to talk about it, which is a really exciting thing because these are people who are genuinely interested in building this stuff. And so we're able to build a group of what started as I think like 6 or 8 of us, grew to maybe a group of 40 to 60 that would meet every other week and talk about what we really thought was cool on the kind of baseline technology in crypto. And out of that came DBA, the investment firm, out of the Bear Market Homework Club, where John and I were like, I think we have what we need to do to build a New York-based venture fund at the end of the day that does the things that we want to do, which is spend a ton of time on one idea, litigate it to its natural conclusion, form a view on it, and if there's something we want to invest in, we'll go do it. This is the type of work we both like, and we found that founders really wanted. What founders didn't care about was necessarily the amount of capital or name. What they really wanted was a investor who was super excited and liked the idea as much as they did, and that they could tell when you weren't talking, you were thinking about that idea, you were pushing it forward, you were researching it, you were trying to really understand it. And so the original kind of manifestation of DBA has been an investment firm that just takes that and leads investing rounds into private companies. Whatever the company could be, we're a bit agnostic about it. It's really, is the founder doing something really cool that we understand and can really help them out with? So that's kind of the core of what we do. Most people would understand us as a traditional investment firm as we manage outside capital. We don't make that many investments. Fund 1 was only 9 investments total, which is about a fourth of what you would see for a firm our size. And the reason we do that is our view is that there's not a million things happening in crypto, but the things that are happening are really big. And we'd rather spend time on a few things that we really love because we just think the world's too interesting to waste our time on things we're not super excited about. So John, I don't know if you want to add any nuance. I feel like we haven't had to tell that story in a while, so I don't remember how well that was said.
No, it's very interesting.
Nope.
I mean, the Bear Market Homework Club, it almost like gives me like Dead Poet Society type vibes, where it's like, you get this group of people together and they kind of explore these different things, different themes that are maybe outside of traditional, like, core education. And John, I'll let you add on if you want to go to more of that story. But MJ, while he thinks about that, like, I want to dive into this idea. Like, you almost sound like you're nostalgic for like these old Bitcoin days. So I'm curious to like dive into those. Like when you think about this old Bitcoin and now it's reemerging, like what does that mean? What was there something different in the air, like different forms of thoughts, different expectations of what Bitcoin would become? Like what is that feeling that you think is now coming back?
I think that you cannot falsify authenticity. And where our job is to talk to founders, and the difference between an authentic founder and a derivative founder is instant in terms of why they are doing this thing. They are genuinely passionate. They want this thing to exist. They don't really care about the outcome, meaning that they're not doing it to do some token structure and round that doesn't make sense. It is very much I just want this interesting thing to exist, which resonates with how I think about spending my time in my life and what DBA is meant to be in terms of identifying and supporting these people with what they need to build this very authentic vision. And the authentic vision that is commonly shared is, I got really into the idea of the internet. This, whatever that set of values could be to you, they're quite universal, and I think people get excited about them. But there's not a lot of things in the world that look and feel like the internet to us. Everything feels very terrestrial, very regional, very old, very analog, and they want to build things that work for everybody anywhere in the world the exact same way. That's kind of the principle underlying what they're trying to tell you, whether that means they are in favor of access, open access. Anyone with TCP/IP can access the service. That could be really interesting to them. Whether it's the kind of ubiquity of access and fairness kind of piece of it, which is anyone gets treated the same because they're anonymous. It's not biased based on who you are or what you're trying to provide. There's some different properties that I think that resonates with this group. But at the end of the day, why we really like it is these are people who are authentic, could be doing lots of stuff. They have high optionality, right? They're very talented developers, and they're choosing to work on this thing. And I think that's a very exciting, interesting group of people, and they just tend to build the future. That group of people has significantly outpaced the group of people who are kind of sequential rule followers who say, here's my KPI, I'm going to go optimize a KPI and get a good outcome. I don't think interesting things are built that way.
Okay. And then John, I have a question for you, because it feels like you've really been on the forefront of the research side. And I think people were very surprised to find out that you're only 28 this past week, and they were like amazed at your depth of knowledge here. And I'm curious, like, what is your process, maybe both of you, for like going through and researching these topics and putting together these like insanely dense pieces that I think are novel and at the frontier? So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure, happy to. I mean, the short answer for most people is it's never anything magic. I mean, I don't even come from a particularly technical background at all. I very much do not. Really, it is just about, you need to be excited about whatever the things you are looking into are, and then just spending a ton of time on them. I am very much the type of person where, I mean, I could tell that I needed to actually start working full time in crypto, because I mean, the year or so prior to it where I was getting interested in it was, I mean, I was the type of person who just for fun was starting to spend as much time reading about, random crypto white papers and technical stuff, just like on the weekends at night, just for fun, because I liked doing it. I was just thinking about it all the time. I was like watching videos, trying to learn how this stuff worked. So I think that is the main thing, is just, I think you do need to be really interested in, just want to like eat, sleep, and breathe it. And then my literal process when I'm doing a thing is, and this kind of gets to our whole process of, we don't want to do a lot of investments. We want to just do the things that we're interested in. When I'm working on something that I'm interested in, that is my primary thing that I just need to spend a lot of time on. And so, when I'm writing a big report, that ends up looking like I've got a big document open. I always have 100 tabs open on whatever this thing is. I'm always saving stuff, just like thinking about it, like really trying to form a thesis around this thing. And then I mean, this is why long form writing helps me so much, is that's the output that people see, is that I have written this thing, but so much of it for me is that kind of opposite part of it, of like, even if I wasn't going to publish these things, writing all of this out in long form for me is always just the best way to learn about something. If I just read pieces kind of tangentially every once in a while, it's really just hard to get it to stick in your head when, you don't really test, can I repeat this thing? Where do I poke holes in my thesis? So really just doing, focused, this is the thing that I'm super interested in for the next month or whatever. Most of the stuff that I read is going to be about this. Whenever I have an interesting thought, I very quickly just like, I write it down, put it in the document, and then I just keep rearranging my thoughts over time. So definitely for me, just long form writing is the most important thing. And then just being able to take the dedicated time of, this is the thing that I'm going to spend a lot of time on. And so it doesn't scale. You can't be an expert on everything in crypto. But the stuff that I'm super interested in, I make sure to just carve out time to be able to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. I mean, I think that there is this like deeper rooted passion for the people that are most successful in this space. A couple of years ago, like I wasn't really working, but I was still spending every waking moment looking up things about Bitcoin and ZK and this broader ecosystem. And so, yeah, there's this like insatiable desire to kind of keep chasing after these topics that you want to research. And it's more of a labor of love rather than, anything else. And I think that comes out in a lot of your work. With that said, maybe now we can hop into like some of the Bitcoin stuff. Part of the reason why I brought you guys on is the announcement will be out by the time we publish this. You have co-led, our strategic round into Alpin Labs. And so maybe you can speak to a little bit of like why Alpin and why Bitcoin L2s.
Sure. I guess I can start on this one. And so the latest post will be out at the time as well. When people are seeing this, should go out tomorrow, at least for when we're recording it. But yeah, I mean, kind of summarizing, like the thesis that we've had on Bitcoin L2s is, it kind of gets back to, my process of just being interested in Bitcoin in general. Of when I got in, it was this thing that I was obviously interested in. It just wasn't what I spent a lot of time on for the very simple reason of, most of these interesting scaling ideas, you just couldn't do them on Bitcoin. And I remember it not long after I came in was, around when John Light, he had written the validity ropes on Bitcoin paper. And that was super exciting to me. And anyone who talked to me at the time was my answer was simple of I will be very interested in Bitcoin once this stuff moves to a stage of it being practical. And the TLDR is that in the past year, all of that has actually changed. And this stuff is actually very practical now. And I would say that, so the TLDR of, I would say why we are excited about this space and then Alpin in particular, a lot of it came down to in the piece of what I think most people are missing, at least what we are uniquely excited about is I think that most people just don't realize how far along these things actually are. And they are very much over-indexing on what do Ethereum L2s look like, and then just applying those same ideas to kind of this is what Bitcoin L2s are going to look like. And that ends up with a lot of problems for people. And I think the differences are somewhat obvious once you kind of lay them out. Of the differences to me end up stemming from the fact that Ethereum and Bitcoin started in kind of these opposite directions. Of Bitcoin started with, we're just building the money. We're not doing any of this fancy, we're not doing the execution environment, any of those things. Versus Ethereum started on the other side of we are going to build the execution environment where this is all the interesting apps are going to be. And then we're going to, do all these scaling solutions on top of that. And so the direct result of that is that in my mind, Bitcoin and Ethereum L2s just have a just fundamentally different purpose. And there's a completely different market opportunity there if you look at most of the stuff that's on the Ethereum L2s, and this is the criticism of them from a lot of the Solana people, which I think is valid, is most of this stuff is the exact same stuff that you do on the L1, just in a different environment that's a little bit faster and cheaper. And so fundamentally, they're usually just competing for, these kind of edge use cases, people who are just using money in just these various ways. This is the small pot of money that I'll go use on the L2, but I keep my real money on the L1 because most of the stuff that I need to do is I could just do it on L1. These are fundamentally the same thing. I just want to use basic DeFi. I want to do private payments, stuff like that. Versus in Bitcoin, just none of that is obviously true. You can't do anything on Bitcoin L1 for the most part. And so I think the Bitcoin L2s would end up looking very different because I think there is a role to not just build in Bitcoin world, what do all these OP stack different L2s look like? You're basically building what is Bitcoin's fundamentally its execution layer. You are building the thing on top of Bitcoin that looks like actually what Ethereum L1 is doing, not what Ethereum L2s are doing. And so one is, I think that's super exciting because, it's just a larger market opportunity. It's a super exciting, cool thing that I think a lot of people are going to want to use its size. And then the other part of that is, and this gets to more of into the direction of why Alpin and a lot of the kind of newer innovations over the past year is, I think that people are over-indexing to what made the Ethereum L2s kind of the winners. And I think that will look different in the Bitcoin L2 world in particular. This is one of the things I talk about in the post is it's not a sexy thing, but I think the security actually does matter a lot for these Bitcoin L2s. And that is just, so I think a lot of people are over-indexing on, we looked at these Ethereum L2s and, people just want to throw money into Blast. They just want to go gamble on these, stage 0 roll up. Nobody cares about security. This doesn't matter. Who cares? You should just go launch a sidechain on Bitcoin. That's what's going to get all the users anyway. And I think that's fundamentally missing the point. If people do that in Ethereum, because I could do all the stuff that I need on the L1, there is a very high bar to clear. And so it never made sense for these Ethereum L2s to prioritize, shipping this thing that is pretty much at, security and feature parity to the L1, because I'm not going to go do my basic, borrow, lend, sizable DeFi, keep my stable coins, stuff like that on an L2 if I could just do it on the L1. In Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. So I think the L2s, such as Alpin, I think that they will actually, if you want to compete for that top spot, you will have to prioritize security a lot more and a lot sooner. And so that will make actually a very big difference. And fundamentally, that is a very difficult thing to do on Bitcoin. And that wasn't possible really until the last year. And that kind of gets into the last part of what I think a lot of Ethereum people are still kind of missing is that kind of ever since the BitVM paper came out, I think that most people's first reaction to it was, oh, this is super cool. This is like this great hacky idea. But then everyone was like pretty, open at the time of, it's a really cool idea, but like, this isn't really practical. This thing that we have here right now, it's kind of rough around the edges. There's a lot of quirks, there's weird games around the edges with like capital efficiency. There's like weird problems. It's permissioned, all these different things. And I don't think that people realize like how much that has progressed over the past year with BitVM2 and all the iterations that you guys have done to the point where you just are at the system where you can very concretely launch what Strata will be later this year of it's a ZK rollup with an optimistic ZK bridge on Bitcoin with a one event trust assumption. Like that is a great thing, which you fundamentally could never do before in Bitcoin. And so I think that summarizing, putting that together is, I think that Ethereum people, and really just most of crypto are very much over-indexing on like, what did Ethereum L2s look like? And they're just missing that, this thing is going to look different than what is the latest EVM fork L2 on Ethereum going to look like, because it's going for a fundamentally different market. It's going to prioritize different things, that it's going to look different. And so a lot of the lessons that I think you actually need to take look more like, what do users on Ethereum L1 care about and use and stuff like that? Because I think that's actually a lot more what this will look like. That's super exciting.
So if I tried to like boil that down or distill it down, I think the core thing that you're saying is different, is that the Ethereum L2s kind of were just an improvement of the layer one. But in Bitcoin land, it really is going from 0 to 1. It's going from 0 execution to 1. And there are a couple of benefits of that. One, it means that the L2s won't necessarily be competitive or parasitic to the L1, which is a problem that I think is maybe happening in Ethereum land. And then I also think that you're saying that while you have these things like people chasing yield, who are appearing as if they're not prioritizing security, if you actually look at the numbers, still the vast majority of ETH in value still happens on the L1. And so your position here is that security, contrary to the popular belief in the narrative, security really is like highly valued by people. And you think that the L2s in Bitcoin land that do prioritize having the lowest levels of trust and the highest amounts of security will actually align with kind of what we're seeing of where value ultimately aggregates. And then I think the last thing you said is that, yes, BitVM, it feels like the major research questions have kind of been closed. And these things are actually going to start being practical and start coming to market and be able to secure, substantial amounts of value as soon as this year. Did I do a decent job of kind of summarizing your position there?
Yeah. Also,
I would add, I think that's 100% the kind of core of the DBA thesis here. The thing I would add that I think is important is there's kind of a direction of progress in crypto, and everything is moving in one direction, which is the more Bitcoin is in its own lane. Bitcoin is not competing with any of the other things we think about really in the DBA portfolio. The past year, it has really clearly established itself there's Bitcoin and crypto, right? Like these things are very different. And what we have seen is not a one-way function, but close to a one-way function, which is once people really do get Bitcoin, they don't sell it. If they do anything, they try to accumulate more of it. But there is this very much once you're a believer, you are a durable for life believer in why this thing makes sense. And if you think about the other arrows, we have an arrow of a bigger market cap, bigger asset base, more distribution. You also have an arrow of more interest to do things with it. And so it's very logical that Bitcoin's going to go larger and people are going to want to do more things with it. And that leads you to adding execution. And so a lot of this is just very simple long-term thinking. Like I've been in crypto long enough that I'm fortunate that I don't have a big Twitter presence. So I'm not exposed to people screaming at me all day. And I'm able to take a step back and just think over the next 3, 5, 7 years, what do we believe strongly to be true? These are good questions to ask. Bezos has the famous, what are the 10 questions that will be true in 10 years? We know Bitcoin will be larger. They'll have more people who understand it, and there are more people that want to do things with it. And if those things are true, this makes sense. It's not that complex or big of a reach to believe those three things. And then I'll add something that John didn't, but it's important, is that the Alpine team is exceptional. Like, we would probably back you all to do a lemonade stand. It'd probably be a really cool lemonade stand with some interesting wrinkles. But a lot of why we got excited at the end of the day was it's not just that the founders are great. It's that the founders are attracting people better than themselves. And that's always a sign of, we don't care what you're doing. Let's work together. And so, David, you're lucky enough to work with 12 of the smartest people I've ever met. They're smart in their own properties and dimensions. They're all thoughtful. They're all high principled. The team has set a very strong long-term vision for what you're doing. And it's just kind of a no-brainer when all those things are put together.
Definitely. Well, I think we're up to like 26 or 27 now. So than 12. But okay, so I'm curious, like maybe in your guys' circles, maybe the non-Bitcoin circles, like have you had conversations where what is the perception? Are people kind of on the same page of, oh, Bitcoin's back, this is going to be amazing? Or am I just in this small little echo chamber? Like, do other VCs and investors and people in Ethereum and Solana, like, do they take this movement seriously yet? Or are they still kind of like, not interesting?
It's the most obvious thing people don't understand, that Bitcoin's going to be the biggest ecosystem in the next 2 years. Like, I think that there is interest, and oddly, most people got in because of Bitcoin. The older they are, the more likely that to be true. But it definitely has not tipped in the way that it will be screamingly obvious in the next 12 months. Once these L2s get live, you're going to see everyone's like, of course, Bitcoin's the biggest ecosystem. There's $3 trillion, $2 trillion, $4 trillion of assets here. Like, of course, it's the ecosystem. So not yet, but I think it'll happen basically overnight. It'll be an overnight 10-year success.
Interesting. John, what do you think about that? Are you kind of hearing the same thing in the research circles, or are people still a little skeptical of it?
So similar view personally. If I remember, I had tweeted out a while ago, so probably around the time when we had like actually just met your guys' team, of like similar to what MJ was saying, of I think this is going to be the thing that, I mean, you look back at this in a couple of years from now, and it's going to be just so obvious. It was just, oh yeah, like this is the biggest asset. Like, people are going to want to do stuff with this thing. Like what is the proper? It's just a matter of what is the proper form. What is that going to look like? That's very much my view. I think most of the view is still not in line with, kind of what I would say what we're describing here and what's in this post. I would say more of the kind of like VC world mindset is much more of around the time when, the BitVM paper came out. I would say there was a big rush of a lot of people who were just throwing money at anything, calling themselves a Bitcoin L2. And, using that word very loosely, kind of interpretation of that. I mean, it's just blast on Bitcoin type of things. And so there was, I would say, a fair amount of that over the past year. And then people just kind of like lost interest in it, I would say, over the past year, when, I mean, our thesis was very simple the entire time of like, yeah, that stuff is obviously going to happen, but that's not the interesting stuff to us. That's not what matters. It's not making blast on Bitcoin. It's making Ethereum L1 on top of Bitcoin and then building out from there. And we just understood that like that's going to take a couple of years to actually do that. And so I think that's kind of more of the sentiment in the kind of like investor circle, is still that like, this is more like Ethereum L2s. It's going to be whatever. It's going to look similar to them. We're just going to have a bunch of different chains. It's fine if they're just like super trusted and whatever. People are going to go gamble on them and do stuff like that. And that they were a little bit disappointing over the past year. We didn't get as far as we would have hoped. I would say more of the sentiment within, I would say, the more like kind of technical Ethereum type circles is, I would still say the broad sentiment is just underestimating / not realizing what you can actually build with Bitcoin now. Is this is not the same conversation that we were having a year ago, where it was, maybe we could do some stuff, but like there's a million open research questions and this isn't super practical yet. I don't think that most people realize, no, that this is very real. You can build these things. Like, most of the questions are answered. It's going to be shipped pretty soon, and they're just going to get better from there. And I think that people just don't realize that still. That is still the overwhelming sentiment that I get from like most people I talk to, I would say, on the Ethereum side. Is they just, there's not much of a realization of how far along this has gotten in the past year and how close it actually is now.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, just giving like a little bit of the insider view, I see us jumping almost directly to the end game of modularity, right where, Ethereum is, but without a lot of the technical bloat. Is that similarly what you see and what you expect, where maybe we go from just having like, oh, it's a single EVM chain, to maybe you can have multiple execution environments. Maybe you can have off-chain data availability. Maybe you can have like the pre-confirmations, like that to me is, I think, a direction that we're heading, and that immediately it's that kind of like overnight 10-year success that MJ was talking about, where you're going to see, holy crap, this thing is like at feature parity with the most bleeding edge, ecosystems that we have. Is that something that you see is viable? And maybe, John, on your side, like, are there that you can see like any issues jumping to that end game? Like, do you think that if we have ZK verification, is that enough to kind of get us as close to feature parity with Ethereum? I mean, I know we won't have things like single slot finality, et cetera, but like, what are the other things that maybe we wouldn't be able to replicate?
Yeah. So I think the like good framework for it is kind of, Vitalik had this post several years ago of, I don't remember the exact name of it, but something along the lines of base layer escape velocity functionality, something like that. Where it's basically saying, I mean, the ideal protocol that you want at the end of the day is it's just enough to have these kind of rollups, with the just enough being basically ZK verification, which I would say with the latest Strata Bridge type design, I mean, you can have a ZK rollup, and then the verification of that by the L1 it's almost there. It's one event. It's not quite, up to par, exactly the same as Ethereum, but I do think it will get there in time, particularly if you do get future soft forks like Opcat. So I think that part is there. The other question is, I would say, how important is the DA part? Because at least on that, Bitcoin is going to be very far behind for at least the very foreseeable future of, Ethereum is just going to have a lot more DA scaling. And I've already seen some conversations in the Bitcoin side of, hey, if this stuff really works, or if, I saw like the podcast that was like Robin and Liam were doing on shielded CSV.
Right.
And Robin was making a similar point of, hey, if this stuff really takes off, the shielded CSV stuff, like that's probably a conversation to increase the block size a few years down the line. It's not urgent right now, but it's the same idea of, I mean, it's basically an argument of like, it sounds like blobs and rollups of, if we're just increasing this arbitrary data, that's different than increasing the UTXO set. It's not as strenuous on the nodes. It's a parameter that maybe we play with over time. In any case, I don't think it's ever going to get that Bitcoin is providing the same level of DA that Ethereum will in the future. The question is, does that matter? Particularly when Ethereum is also not going to provide enough DA for the entire world. There is a full acceptance, and I think there'll be even more of acceptance of that over the coming years of, this is still orders of magnitude short, even what Ethereum is planning to do in the longer run of, you're still going to need, whether it's Celestia, EigenDA, whatever, these different kind of like off-chain DA solutions. And so you're going to have this mix of, yes, there is this like ultra trustless product, which is basically what Alpine is hopefully going to be building of, once you get ZK verification, the minimal amount of on-chain data, users get their full guarantees effectively. And then the question is, how much of that do you need versus how much of it is going to be okay in the future that, we use that for a lot of the high value settlement type stuff. And then there's a lot of overflow of people using, some volition mode, some different type of DA mode. Where, you get ZK verification on Bitcoin, but you're using diff DA. My intuition is, I mean, Ethereum is never going to push the limit of this is enough for the world anyway. And so as long as Bitcoin is providing enough for like general functionality, it's going to be a pretty good amount. Once you are posting a pretty minimal amount of data and you work on compression and stuff like that, that most of the functionality is going to be there of like, this is a minimum viable competitor on that front, that I don't think the additional DA will matter a lot. And then, you get into these things of, Ethereum will potentially be faster, potentially have single slot finality over time. But again, even on the Ethereum side, I don't think that they're ever going to get to a level that is competitive with something like, for example, Celestia. They're never going to get to, these sub-second single slot finality block times with the same type of size. So even Ethereum is never going to be the most like technically advanced on any of these fronts. And that is like really the best comp here. And so if, again, it's not going to push the limit all the way, you're going to end up relying on these different kind of off-chain infrastructure for a lot of these shorter guarantees. You're going to have, whatever, version of like AgLayer kind of thing. You're going to have pre-confirmations off-chain from roll-up sequencers. You're going to have all these things in both ecosystems regardless. And so does Bitcoin have the minimum viable functionality in the long run? If you get like real good ZK verification, you're able to build real roll-ups on top of Bitcoin? I would say that yes, it does. And that was actually a lot of the point that I was making, kind of trying to give Ethereum, I would say, advice in my last piece of like the Ethereum's North Star type of piece, which annoyed a lot of people, was that is kind of what I generally foresee happening, is that if Bitcoin adds all these things and Ethereum just doesn't care about L1 execution anymore, what advantage do you really have over Bitcoin at that point that matters? And I don't think there's a lot that is really meaningful at that point, if both of them are just saying our money and we're the settlement layer. Like Bitcoin is just better at those things. Like very objectively, it is just better at those things. And so that was the reason why I thought that Ethereum, I was like, hey, I think that you really need to prioritize L1 execution, because I think that is the thing that you can credibly, uniquely compete on as Ethereum for at least a very long time, is that, you know, when Alpin launches, realistically, when Strata launches, it is not going to have the same level of, one, I mean, just reliability and trust as Ethereum L1. It hasn't been around for as many years, and it doesn't have the accumulated state yet. You know, Ethereum L1 has a big advantage on this is the best permissionless execution environment right now. And so that was a big part of the reason why I thought that Ethereum should prioritize that more, is because I think the L1 is probably the area where it can most uniquely differentiate from Bitcoin, because Bitcoin fundamentally doesn't have that, but it's going to get this stuff built on top of it over the coming years. And at that point, yeah, I mean, if you're just saying this thing at the end of the day is, it's money and it's a settlement layer, Bitcoin is going to be better at all of those properties, I think, in the future. And I think that will be pretty obvious in a few years.
One thing I would add, John, that is really important is people who are building serious things want long-term commitments that things are going to exist and look the way that they understand that they will look. And the beauty of ASICs, which we had not actually thought of, we actually had this discussion about forking out ASICs, ASIC resistant algorithms and things, is we have a pretty high level of certitude and high level of resolution about what Bitcoin's going to look like for the next decade. And it turns out that a lot of people really value that because it allows for capital and talent to accumulate in the same direction in a way that a chain that needs to stay modern can't quite do. If you think about what Hyperliquid is doing with top-of-block cancels, if you're just building an exchange, there are some very specific transaction patterns you want to favor because of the type of sequencing you want to do to make markets as efficient as possible. Well, that doesn't necessarily make sense for every application. And so Bitcoin's goal should not be ever to get to feature parity with these performant chains, because intention with feature parity is long-term accumulation of like, hey, I know what this is going to do over the next decade. And so I do think that that is one of the big technical, practical edges Bitcoin has, is I know what it's going to look like, and it allows me to form long-term capital commitments around what it's going to look like. You can use debt financing, equity financing, lots of different ways with which you can access the markets to invest in the future that you can't quite if you're not even sure what the network will look like in the next decade. So I don't want to minimize the kind of the trade-off discussion that Bitcoin, ETH, Solana, and the other groups need to think about to just be technical properties, because there will always be a faster, we'll keep, parity is hard to keep, but I do think there are some other properties that are actually more important for capital accumulation and state accumulation, which is what we probably care about.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, the way I see what you guys mentioned is like, let's assume with these L2s, with no soft forks whatsoever, maybe we do get a soft fork, but with these L2s, you could probably get, I'm just making up a number, like close to 95% of the kind of like feature parity and functionality of these other chains. And so maybe we could make the argument that some of these chains, the L1s, could be, slightly more optimized with things like single slot finality. But my question to you guys is like, if we're in this world where we're at, 95% and we have pre-confirmations and off-chain DA and trustless interop between multiple execution environments and all of that, like where does the network effect actually amass? And like what has the defensible network effect? And I think you guys know where I'm going with this. Like I genuinely, I don't think this is cope. It's like, why would you not build on Bitcoin? Like why would you not want to give yourself access with the least amount of trust possible to by far the largest value, largest asset and largest piece of collateral? Like, does my thesis make sense there? And where do you think that I'm possibly wrong on that?
I would start with mostly, I don't think it's necessarily exclusionary anymore. I think Morpho is on 6 environments already. And so I don't necessarily think we need to think of it as like people doing single environment deployments anymore. And so that's where I'd start. Like I would expect USDC, Tether, all the major stables to launch everywhere. And the question to more like, what will the Bitcoin native execution kind of groups look like and why? And what will the transaction patterns, what will be favored? There are things like asset-backed lending, we know are just huge unlocks, right? There's other cool companies doing it, but once, they're not doing it to be able to work on Bitcoin. Most of them are like Lava, a really cool company doing DLCs, but you end up with a stablecoin on Solana, so a bit different. So that would be my first thing, which is like, let's not think too exclusionary necessarily, just because I think we see multi-environment deployments. So everyone will definitely deploy to the biggest market, which is Bitcoin. Like maybe the question is really like, where would you go first and why? Not like, where will you only go? So that's how I would think about it. John, I don't know if you have kind of a different DeFi view.
Yeah, my general simple view is kind of to answer your question very simply is you play this out to the end game, network effects are around the money, and that's it. That very simply is the one thing that is like absolutely fundamental. What is the reason why you launch an L2 on top of Ethereum or Bitcoin or some other chain is because you want trust minimized access to that base layer asset. If you do not care about that, then you fund and the other state kind of in that domain. But fundamentally, I mean, the thing that you really need is that kind of base asset. And so at the end of the day, if Bitcoin is the asset that people want the most, then that is where you need to launch that thing. If I just as a user have the highest demand for, hey, I want to do basic DeFi and I want to do this in a trustless manner and I want to use Bitcoin as collateral and I don't want to use ETH as collateral, you need to have a Bitcoin L2, and that's the thing that the user is going to gravitate towards, whatever their preference is for whatever that asset is, and then you kind of need to build around in reflection of that. And so I do directly see that playing out once this is unlocked, is more gravitation towards that.
I think that is something that is going to annoy a lot of people that they know is true in their heart of hearts, is that all the value is going to accrue into the monetary premium. And like it or not, Bitcoin does primarily own that. And I think there were a lot of people who were probably going to be correct about the technology and modularity and, Solana's product market fit and all this stuff. But eventually, as we kind of trend towards this idea that we are all building the same thing and we can reach close feature parity, that the majority of it just wants to be around the network effect of money. And I think that that is going to be a little bit of a brutal reality for people that were kind of like correct directionally about like the technology, but then ultimately it still amasses to Bitcoin. That's going to break a lot of people's brains.
Well, there's a funny thing. It's like, don't show me your deck, show me your book. And if you think about what percentage of crypto fund managers end up personally with money in Bitcoin and very little else, respect to Kyle at Multicoin. He owns a lot of Sol. He's like actually, one of the people who does it the way he says he's doing it. But a lot of people just play the Bitcoin accumulation game at the end of the day. And they have very complicated decks and programs to buy more Bitcoin. So, show me your book, I guess, would be my answer to some of the critics.
Yeah.
The short answer too that I think that is also matters, and this is kind of, I would say, the actual core takeaway of the we're all building the same thing, is that at the end of the day, if we are all building directionally the same thing, which I think is the case, what actually matters is just what was the correct sequencing and prioritization of what did we decide to build along the way, because the outcome is very path dependent. Because I think that there is a future where, for example, that Bitcoin does all the things that we're saying, that, it gets this functionality, all the L2s on here are super successful, everything gravitates around there. And then we look back in a few years and it was like, oh, this was super obvious. Bitcoin was the thing. It started with money. That was the one thing that we said has a network effect. Everything gravitated towards there. That is a very viable and like probably base case type outcome for me. I think that there is also a like different path dependent future where it just takes too long to build all of these different scaling solutions on Bitcoin, like particularly if, VM didn't happen and you guys weren't doing what you were doing, or maybe it just turns out to be more complicated than we thought or not as scalable as we thought, all these different things. And that, in the next 5 years or whatever, because we didn't build that stuff in time for Bitcoin, there's a lot of custodial capture, people just end up using the ETFs. This on-chain ecosystem doesn't get built around it. And then all of that stuff just happens on top of Ethereum because it was just the next best thing that was available and ready in the time that mattered. And so that is a big part of why I like, even putting aside our excitement for, Alpin and Strata as an investment, putting that aside and just like as a Bitcoiner and a person who has like does care about Bitcoin a lot, both just like as a project and also financially invested in it. That's why I think that this stuff is very important to Bitcoin, is because I think adding that functionality and the timing of adding that functionality actually does matter, because there is a different future where people just don't care about these things. And we just say, it's fine. We just want the number to go up, and as digital gold, it's fine if it goes into all the ETFs. And like, we don't need to worry about anything else about that. Sorry if you can't, scale on-chain custody to new users, like, sorry, I was here first. Like, it's fine. Like that is an alt reality that is like possible, and I hope doesn't happen. And I think stuff like Strata is essential towards, making sure that we do scale the ability for users to have self-custody, to be able to do basic finance on chain, that we don't just push them towards, oh, just go buy this in your 401k. Sorry, all the on-chain stuff is too complicated for you. So I do think the prioritization of that and getting that stuff live now does matter a lot.
I also think to that point, I think there's actually a greedy motivation to doing lots of this, which is one of the things that has always worried me about Bitcoin is if you don't have any capital today, you're young, you're poor, it's hard to accumulate Bitcoin in a meaningful amount. It looks expensive. Obviously I understand. We have sats and stuff, but one thing we need to incentivize people is to help build out Bitcoin and earn more Bitcoin for doing so. And I think that there has been a missing incentive outside of proselytizing for the price of saying, hey, you should buy this so my asset goes up. We need to open up the surface area of things people can build that allow them to build businesses that the pie gets larger, their percentage of that grows, and they own some part of the Bitcoin future. And I think that the greedy motivation for all of us is to make Bitcoin do as much as possible to resonate with as many use cases as possible. So young or just ambitious people who want to do things are incentivized to come do it, and we can pay them to do it. And so what the ecosystems like Ethereum and Solana have done very well is allowed new third parties to come in, help them build, grow, and get compensated and be aligned. And the alignment question is a really tricky multi-dimensional problem that I'm sure John will get screamed at about Twitter on the next 60 years of his life. But this is really important. We understand, I do think we reach an asymptote with just the kind of gold story that people can't actually build and feel like they're earning Bitcoin to grow their wealth in Bitcoin unless you have to buy it with dollars. I don't think that's the future we want.
Yeah, I posted about this recently a bit, that like I'm not naive to this fact that number go up is the primary driver behind like a lot of the interest in Bitcoin. But in some ways, I do fear that parts of the community, major parts of the community are kind of like selling their soul, so to speak, for number go up. And it's kind of like, don't piss off the people with the money. And the people with the money are the institutions and the nation state countries. And so, do you want to add things that you can build self-custodial solutions because that disintermediates the big money like the BlackRocks who make huge amounts of fees off of the flow? Like, no, not really. That might impact number go up. Or like, do you really want to add, like privacy and shielded CSV and those types of things to Bitcoin? Because like, like nation states kind of want to like spy on their citizens. I don't know. I'm just like making generalizations here, but there is, the Bitcoin culture is very tenuous. And, for me, like there was a point where I was very worried about that. And I was like, oh man, maybe we've lost our way a little bit. But now I would say with all this development that we're kind of seeing with BitVM, and maybe we get, OpCat or OpCKP or something like that. But even if we don't, there's enough there to where now I think the builders have kind of like reasserted control in Bitcoin a little bit, where it's like, even if there's no additional changes or no soft forks whatsoever, there's this reemergence of this builder culture that I think that you guys are both indicating, where it's like, we're going to build these solutions, whether people like it or not. We're going to give people scalable self-custody. We're going to give people, payments. That to me has been like very encouraging. And I've started to see a shift into Bitcoin culture. And so maybe you guys can, pontificate a bit on your thoughts on further on Bitcoin culture. Like, is it something that is deeply concerning to you from an investment perspective? Or do you think that we've, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin culture as a whole?
I think each generation of Bitcoin culture is defined by kind of a public voice. Obviously, there's one very strong one at the moment. And what we hope would happen is that very thoughtful, legitimate voices emerge out of this group of people. Like, I think it's less about kind of the technical questions, and it's really, can you be a storyteller that reaches many different levels of abstraction? These are people that are asset managers, technologists, whatever it is. What we really need to see out of this group is not be so closed-minded and insular where we litigate amongst ourselves. I think that was a great phase. But we need kind of a new voice to come up and say, here's why Bitcoin makes sense today. Here's this optimistic case for the future, why the internet needs its own currency. Here's what it's going to be used for. Here's why it applies to everybody. And there are some interesting voices, and this isn't to lessen what people have done to get us here, because everyone has done a great job to get us here. But I think that's what I'm really excited to see. It's like, who is going to be the young person that's going to stand up and be like, this is what's resonated with me? Because I think everyone has a story of why they got into crypto. It's almost always driven by someone who's a great storyteller. This great storyteller was on a podcast, or they did this thing and it attracted them and it brought new voices and new people. And this is a successful kind of next phase of Bitcoin if we get lots of young, interesting developers from around the world to come contribute. And so that's what I'm personally looking for. is these new voices that tell a new story about what Bitcoin is. And what I think is one of the most interesting times to be alive of people are really understanding the power of these internet native things for the first time. I think they're firmly in the mainstream. And so this is its chance to tell that story.
Does this feel like old Bitcoin, MJ? I asked you that earlier, but
it doesn't. It does. So Scaling Bitcoin was my favorite conference. It was put together by DCI and Jeremy Rubin. And why I loved it was the arguments were so nerdy in the best way possible. Like there would be a talk and then 27 people in the hallway screaming at each other. And that's what you want to see, where today it's a talk sponsored by some SaaS company or some protocol you've never heard of, and then the guy goes to his third panel of the day. It's not the hallway kind of track that is the strong part. And that's what we want to see, hallway tracks. We want to see hallway tracks litigating the core ideas. The thing that's the biggest difference was I went around with Novogratz for 4 or 5 years where we're trying to tell the story of Bitcoin. And the challenge was the entry kind of conditional reference frame was so different for different people. Hedge fund guys thought of one guy, private equity guys, central banks, treasury, they all thought of it as a different thing. This was kind of a babblefish that spoke many languages depending on who the audience was. And digital gold was the thing that finally kind of resonated as a thing. And then fastest horse obviously was kind of its next phase. But the reason I bring this up is we have been very malleable. Nick Carter has a great narrative chart of what has Bitcoin's narrative been. And so it doesn't feel old where we're still trying to figure out who we are and why. I think it's very clear what Bitcoin is. But what does feel like the old days is people are listening to Jeremy again. There was, the last time I went to a Bitcoin conference before this year was, I was at Scaling Bitcoin in 2019, which is in Israel right before COVID. And I'm walking into the talk and 3 developers that go, well, we're not going to ever change that. Why would we even listen to that talk? That was a literal statement. And I think now that would be seen as small-minded and unnecessary. So it doesn't feel like that world, 2019, but it feels more on the dev side, 2016, 2017.
Yeah, you'd actually mentioned a couple names there, and I'm just going to plug Alpin, but you had mentioned Jeremy. I think I can announce this, but Jeremy's an angel in Alpin. You mentioned DCI, Neha, who's like the director of MIT's DCI. She's an angel. And then you mentioned Nick, who also was one of our lead investors through Castle Island. So it feels kind of good to get this, all these names that you mentioned of this kind of, who had this spirit of the type of Bitcoin that maybe we want to bring back and reemerge. It's like, hell yeah, we're bringing all these people in.
100%. People ask us all the time, when should I pay attention to crypto? These are big $10, $20 billion asset managers. Like, is there something real? I said, well, I generally go by what do the highest optionality people vote with their time. And this team at Alpin could do anything. They have the choice to do anything with their lives, and they're choosing to work on Bitcoin. And let me tell you why. And then people listen. And so I think that is the strongest sign of what people choose to do that can do anything is the strongest sign of the future. And I think that is the future that we're excited about. That's why the fact that Jeremy and people like yourselves are building stuff, it's just, it means something interesting is happening.
Yeah, it feels good. Okay, John, any hot takes on Bitcoin culture? I mean, are you ready to, delve into Twitter with all the Bitcoin maxis? That might be different from what you've been dealing with in the Ethereum and Solana side.
I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun. But yeah, no, I like definitely echoing, kind of MJ's direction of, definitely when I came into crypto, Bitcoin was very different. And that's why I didn't spend a lot of time there. I was a very, Ethereum centric as far as where I spent my time. I would say I aligned with a lot of like Bitcoin beliefs and how Bitcoin and those types of things. But, what was I reading and what was I writing about and spending time on was Ethereum, because that's where the interesting stuff was. And where Bitcoin is now is I am as excited for Bitcoin now as an ecosystem as I have been about anything in crypto the entire time that I've been in crypto. It really has swung a lot since I even have come in, where you really do have those people who are just like, these are some of the smartest people I met that I've ever met before, and they love what they're doing, and this is what they're spending time on, and real change is actually happening very quickly, which is very, very cool to see. So I've been super excited by it. And I am looking forward to getting a different level of Bitcoin reaction that I've probably seen from the Ethereum side of Twitter in the next week or so. We'll see how it goes.
It is important to pause on why the audience for Bitcoin is. There are a lot of people who are successful in many verticals who get Bitcoin and none of the rest of crypto. Palmer Luckey's famously was in it since the OG days in 2010. And the thing that resonates with people is like, I love the way the internet is built. I want to work on things like that. And a lot of the stuff that has happened since is not appealing to them, not a moralistic or value statement, just it doesn't interest them of what they want to do. And so what I hope is that group of people, Jack Dorsey, people who've built big technology businesses, kind of come back to Bitcoin over the next year and understand what could be done and try to do cool things. And I really hope if Alpin is successful, it will not be because of any of the things that we've seen done before. It will be because a smart, inquisitive person says, I wonder if you could do this on the internet, and they figure out that they can do it on Bitcoin. That would be the best possible outcome other than just what we expect, which is asset-backed lending. Like that is a huge outcome, but it's not the thing that I think we'd all be super excited about.
Okay. Well, so that brings up another good point, which is like, what do we hope actually gets built out here, and what are legitimate apps? You mentioned asset-backed lending. Of course, everybody knows that we want to borrow against our Bitcoin. I think a lot of the other use cases are still yet to be made. I mean, you guys have ideas of products and applications that you would like to see, or is a lot of this thesis just, hey, let's open up as much expressivity and as much scale with as little trust as we possibly can, and then let things spawn from there?
I'll speak to the base of, we expect the base things that we know crypto is used for to get built. Like we know DeFi, stablecoins, that stuff is going to happen and there'll be big markets there. On the kind of Bitcoin native side, I think what people want to understand is how do we get Bitcoin to kind of connect to the rest of the digital world? The limited primitives we have had have really isolated Bitcoin in a way that I think is a bit unnecessary. Just because it's older cryptography, we don't have some of the nice modern additive signatures like BLS. And so one of the questions I have is like, how can we make Bitcoin kind of talk to the rest of crypto? That isn't just a bunch of janky bridges and multi-sigs. I think will be a fun experiment to see what people can do, mostly because we need money. When you have an asset base, you need to do things with it for it to be productive. If you want to, buy a house or something, and you don't want to have to necessarily go through a centralized custodian that impairs my asset with counterparty risk. That's not the point. And so what I really hope is that enough things get built where we do not have to at some point impair our asset. That would be a great vision for me. I think there are things like ZK Swap that are doing really clever, interesting things. There's still some jankiness on the ZK TLS side. We're not quite there. But directionally, I think the one I really want to see get built is identity. I would like an emergent identity. I still personally get very frustrated amount of OAuth, amount of single auth I try to do because I use many different services with many different identities. I would love to see an identity layer get built on Bitcoin. Something very internet native that I can use to build other services on top of would be really cool. I think that's the big unsolved in crypto right now is identity. And I think it's the biggest market we haven't figured out.
So this is just a personal question that I have for myself. Like, identity, I feel like people mention it a lot. Like, do you guys see anything on your end that is a potential promising solution for this? And what has been the ultimate? Because like, I feel like I've heard of so many different identity solutions being proposed. Like, do you know what it is that's prevented these things from solving that problem?
So there's three major identity companies. I'll say two that the audience is probably aware of. One is if you go to the IRS, if you're a U.S. citizen, you pay your login.gov is actually a private company that has a contract with the IRS and has all your identity credentials. And because the IRS has it, it's a great business actually. That's like in the sovereign identity, them and Clear are kind of two of the three. The third is one your audience won't be familiar with. So there's this literalism of taking a sovereign identity and building a digital representation. Once you have the credentials, you're able to reuse the credentials so you don't have to authorize. That's one kind of group. And there's like the kind of enterprise, which would be Apple and Visa are the two biggest identity companies in the world. Apple brands themselves as an identity company. They have the right to lose that business, and they're going to try to continue to build things on top of the Apple identity system. But that's obviously not what we are interested in. We are much more interested in some type of emergent non-sovereign ID. All the obvious things have been tried. You can imagine every single possible way of saying like, here is a wallet, an NFT, some representation. Everybody points to this UDID. I can get credit. I can show my previous transactions. There's lots of different ways that people have tried to build this identity layer. They have each run into their own problems. The number one problem has been the acceptance of the identity by the other person. So let's say you're Kraken and you have a user who's already authorized by Coinbase. How do you know you're allowed to use their KYC and identity information? Well, you don't. And so you have to re-identify them on the other side. So you're not getting any of these network effects because the receiver of the identity does not accept it, that we have done their own work. That's due to liability laws. There's some kind of nasty parts there that have really limited the adoption of this bilateral ubiquitous identity network that you would hope would get adopted. It's not obvious that's why, but that's what's happened to date. So what we really hope happens is we get a stronger emergent identity standard that people feel that they can trust, not from a compliance KYC perspective, but more from like a credit and identity use and reuse idea. So, why that would be built on Bitcoin? It should be built. The internet needs one of these. This is one of these things we didn't put on the internet necessarily, the way that we've had to layer these kind of wacky services on top. So identity plus money are the two that obviously we'd like to add.
Okay, very interesting. All right, I think we covered a bunch here. Any other kind of like spicy hot takes that you guys just want to throw out there? I'll leave it open. Maybe something to get Twitter riled up.
I mean, the main thing that I have in my mind after MJ's thing is I just somewhat following on that is like, while Bitcoin is not going to be a technological unlock for any of these types of things, whether it's identity or whatever use case. I mean, that is something that you're going to be able to technically build on, whether it's Ethereum, NL2, Solana, whatever. I think that we should at minimum like make Bitcoin available for that thing to be built on there, for it to be the core of those things, and then like hopefully it kind of gravitates towards there over time. Either way, I mean, my general view on this is that people like particularly this cycle, like a lot of people in crypto have this kind of anxiety of, where are the interesting new use cases? Like last time, like we had NFTs, DeFi, whatever. Like those are the things. Like what do we have this time? What are the interesting new things? I just never have any of that, because the two very simple things that we have, like non-sovereign money and Bitcoin, amazing, best one we have. Sovereign money, honestly, it's useful. Putting it on financial rails like USDC is undeniably a great product that a lot of people around the world want to use. And then just basic finance on top of those. If you tell me that fast forward, what crypto accomplished was it put all of those on crypto rails and we actually made it scalable, self-custodial, and private, I will be 1,000% insanely happy about that. And that will be like, we made a seriously positive impact on the world if that happens. The risk is that I think that like possibly just does not happen, that we end up, the next 5 years or so probably matter a lot of, do we end up in that world where we do make sure that this future it's self-custodial, we prioritize privacy, we make privacy normal, it's a right. It's not, we just push everyone to go buy Bitcoin in their ETF, and their 401k, and then like we call it a day and then we make money. Those are two different futures. And if we get the first one where the only use cases for crypto, and I think everything is a derivative realistically of payments and basic finance. If we just get that, we have a great non-sovereign money as an opt-out for people, and we have good sovereign money on rails, and we get privacy and like actual usability and self-custodial for everyone in the world. Like I think that's amazing.
I think that point is something that we're actually seeing internally when we have conversations with people about wanting to build on Strata, where they're kind of they're putting aside like the dogmatism and the tribalism, where they're kind of just tired. They're like, hey, like we built something amazing. We just want to see product market fit for it. And the definitive product market fit that we know is this non-sovereign money that you're referring to. So that was very compelling to me, that singular idea of like, we built something cool. How do we actually get into the hands of people beyond just like we have to pay them a token to hold or use this product? Like that is something that's kind of transcending these tribal lines. So that's an interesting point. MJ, were you going to say something?
Yeah. What I hope happens here is around regulation, actually, which is I think that the thing crypto has gotten the most wrong this year that I'm very frustrated with, which is the excitement around the chance to kind of calcify the proper regulatory regime. And they focus on tokens and a bunch of nonsense. And at the end of the day, what matters is the right for digital cash to exist. We need that as a human right. We absolutely need digital cash. Digital cash means the ability to hold a transaction privately. The fact that developers need to be able to write code and someone needs to be able to deploy code without those people being liable for what someone does with it and going to jail. The amount of time people put around the Tornado Cash versus token lawsuits is the biggest sign of you've lost the plot. And so we're going to get a chance over the next 18 and 24 months to litigate the right way for property rights, money, and what really matters for software developers of the future to know and understand when they want to build things. And I think that we need to focus on that because these things last for a really long time. All the BSA regulations are from 9/11, right? That's 23 years ago. We're still dealing with the crazy rules from that. The securities laws were from 1940. And so we have a really important window here. And what Bitcoiners have been right about more than anything is the importance of getting this part right, of getting the interaction with the state, of educating the state on what this thing is and why it has the right to exist and why it needs to be able to exist. And I think that that's the thing that resonates with most people, that kind of view of what we need to do as an industry the next year or two.
And sorry, it wasn't clear to me. Do you feel optimistic that we're heading in the right direction, or are you worried that people have lost the plot here and like we're going to lose this opportunity?
I feel optimistic that we have the chance to do the right thing. I think we have. My understanding is that listen, Coin Center has done an amazing job. Like between Coin Center and Coinbase, the amount of work that they've done to get this right is astounding, and they deserve all the kudos that they get. And so I think that they are doing a really good job, and I trust that they'll execute here. I just think as an industry, we need to kind of take a step back from the securities laws. Obviously, they need to get replaced, but let's be honest, like a lot of the behavior is antagonistic to consumers. We don't have clear vesting schedules, like all the things need to happen on disclosures and stuff. But the more important thing is the very fundamental property rights of what crypto should be. So, and developer protection. So I think we're going to get a chance to do it. And I really want us to focus and get that right.
Cool. Okay, I think that pretty much wraps up all my questions. Maybe we'll just do something random here. Is there anyone by the end of 2025 that you think is currently not supportive of Bitcoin that is going to capitulate and join Team Bitcoin?
I think more Ethereum people are going to.
I think that we will see, who do I want to say here? I think that we will see Justin Drake capitulate and become a fan of Bitcoin.
Know about that one, but I think that is the right profile of the type of person that I think of. Because I think for all the fighting, I think that Bitcoin and Ethereum do share a lot of values, and a lot of people or particularly early Ethereums. I mean, they came out of Bitcoin and they just had this frustrated, like, all right, we can't build this stuff here. We got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
There is a lot of that underlying a lot of Ethereum. And I think once a lot of people realize that, hey, you actually can do this really cool stuff on Bitcoin now, those are certainly the types of conversations I have with a lot of people in Ethereum already, of like, the past year has made me like Bitcoin a lot.
I think a lot of it,
you'll see more of that.
A lot of it is just like a dissonance where people, they often just have like a disdain and a hatred for like a lot of what the kind of like stereotypical like Bitcoin maxi is. And like, even though they want, I talked to some of the biggest names in the Ethereum space, and they're like, no, like we would have legitimately built on Bitcoin. Like our preference is Bitcoin. But you could just tell there's that tension where they're like, I just don't want to justify that these really annoying people who were completely wrong about the tech, that we're going to build on Bitcoin. That feels like a roadblock to me, to be honest. So we'll see.
Yeah, I do think there's a reason that ETH people and Sol people yell at each other. There's a reason Bitcoin and ETH people yell at each other. When someone sees each other as a threat, they treat it that way. And I think actually my prediction for this year is people will not see Bitcoin as a threat to anything, and that it will not get caught in the tribalism, and it will be considered kind of our beachhead of the highest values argument of why this thing should exist and needs to exist in a world that is deglobalizing and doing a lot of things with currency that are antagonistic to the population. And so I actually think it's going to be the lighthouse for the industry, and people are not going to be anti-Bitcoin. I think it's going to just be a neutral, easy thing to support. And I think you're actually going to see more people like that hated Bitcoin 2013 to 2018 are going to come back. Like Jason Calacanis, I think famously tweeted that he owns a material amount of Bitcoin at a very interesting entry price. I think that that's the pattern you're going to see, which is like, I've always been a Bitcoiner, and remember how big of a Bitcoiner I am. A lot of people mining Bitcoin. I think we have like 800 million% of the hash rate from 2013 identified from how many people I've met mining Bitcoin back in the day. And so that's my prediction. And I think that's one of the reasons we're super excited about it. It's just an easy thing for everyone to get behind. There is really no obvious enemy for it at the moment.
Very interesting. Well, I think that's probably a good one to end on. Money for enemies is the theme in 2025. MJ, John, I appreciate your guys' time, and looking forward to working together.
Of course. Thanks.
Ton of fun. Thank you.